I've been a big Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan for a long time, since the 80s. I love the old school cartoon, the comics, the video games, the arcade games. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun for a long time, and there's been a lot of different interpretations of the Ninja Turtles, and I've grown to accept that. That's just the way it is. You get older, they change things up, and that's fine. My turtles are the old school ones, but you know what? I have kids. My kids are getting a little older, though, but the 2012 Turtles, I love those turtles as well. My oldest son, those were the turtles he grew up with, and I enjoyed watching, that cartoon with him, and that was cool, right? But the newest Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the movie that came out, what was it, about a year ago, Mutant Mayhem, they just came out with a video game that ties into that movie. It's not the movie game, but it's tied into that version. It's like after the movie. So the game Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutants Unleashed recently came out a couple days ago. I pre-ordered it for the PS5, but we're actually reviewing it for the Nintendo Switch because I did not get my PS5 copy. I don't know. There's been something weird going on lately with pre-orders on games where I don't know, something will happen and I don't get my copy, and then I look and it's like, okay, either for the Switch or PS5, and then it's like I got to switch to the other version to actually get it. That's what happened today. A lot of times I get the Switch version anyway, but for this game, it was like I thought, I'm going to get it for the PS5. It's going to look better, run better, but that's beside the point. I got it for the Switch, and for the most part, the game looks great, and it runs fine. But real quick, I do want to go over the pros and cons, the negatives and positives with this game real quick, and then I'll just give you my overall feelings on it. So the bad stuff first. So there is it's probably a Switch version concern. There's a lot of freaking loading in this game. Holy crap, you get a cutscene, all the cutscenes are in-game engine, but you get a cutscene, load. Gameplay, loading. Go to a cutscene, loading. Loads to another cutscene, loading. Some of these load screens are like almost a minute long, and then to load into a gameplay segment, even when it transitions into a level, after the load screen goes away, it might still like be frozen on the screen for like 10 seconds before the game actually starts, like the actual level screen. It's weird. There's a lot of loading. Like I said, might be a Switch only issue. So that's a negative. When you first start the game, this is not really a negative. It's just kind of a thing like, hey, just pay attention here. Like when you first start, it back and forth has you playing as different turtles. That's not the way the game is gonna play later on. Because at first I was like, what? I don't get to pick the turtle that I get to play as? No, that's just the beginning. Like I think they just want you to get a taste for each turtle. But after the beginning, it's kind of like the introductory thing. You do get to select which turtle you want to play as each stage that you go through. But yeah, so that's one of the biggest cons for me. Was there's just a ton of loading. That's like the biggest thing, but everything else was mostly fine. The graphics were okay for the Switch version. There's a lot of, as far as the pros go, I think gameplay was okay. The combat was fairly smooth. The graphics, I know, are not going to compare to like the PC version or the PS5, but graphics on the Switch looked okay. I was fine with that. A lot of, spoken dialogue. There's no text. It's all actual voiceover work. And for the most part, that was fine. Now, another big con for me was the enemies. You don't fight a boss for almost an hour and a half into the game. Now, this is a fairly long game. Playthrough is almost like 15 hours for this story mode. Like, it's a decent amount of gameplay here, but you're fighting the same enemies over and over again. The first hour and a half, you're fighting the same 3 enemies. Actually, it's like maybe the first hour you're only fighting 2 enemies over and over. These stupid little bee things and then these little crab trash dudes. And then finally, I don't know, maybe about an hour in, then finally you fight like a hippo guy starts entering into the mix. It's just 3 enemies for the first hour and a half, almost 2 hours of the game. And that's it. Those are all you fight. And then finally, the hour and a half, 2 hours into the game, another new enemy gets introduced and they barely get thrown into the mix. And you're still fighting those first 3 enemies over and over and over again. It's the enemy selection and mix is very mediocre. It's like 2024. Give me a break. Like, there's old school Ninja Turtle games that had a lot more variety than this. I know, like, back in the day, it was like, the Foot Clan and just the soldiers and whatnot. But this is not, 1989, 1991 or anything like this. It's 2024. Mix it up, dude. Tired of fighting bees and freaking trash crabs for 2 hours. Like, that's ridiculous. The game is about mutants being unleashed and, all the good mutants becoming bad all of a sudden. Like throw a bunch of them at you. Like, I understand you're going to use the same ones multiple times, but have a little bit of variety. It gets real boring quick, especially when it's constant loading, and then you're loading into just fighting the same damn thing over and over again. And then, like I said, you don't fight a boss for an hour and a half into the game. This game, now, mind you, as I started this video, I said my turtles were the old school turtles. Now, understand this. This game is meant for a younger crowd. And I'm going into this, like, realizing and understanding that, like, these are not my turtles. I saw the movie that these turtles were based off of. My kids enjoyed it. I mostly enjoyed it, but they weren't my turtles. Like, that's just set aside. But I'm not going into this with that bias saying, screw these turtles. It's fine. It's just the game itself, it needed a little bit more variety. Everything else was mostly fine. Like I said, the combat was okay. The graphics were okay. But I think some of the level design as well was a little weird at times. Like, it's mostly straightforward. Like, it's linear. But the camera shouldn't be an issue in a game like this. Like, you have no control over the camera, but there's certain parts where it's like you could kind of fidget the camera a little bit and it just mildly shifts, which is stupid. Like, why even have any control over the camera if you can't move it? Like, you could just shift it slightly, like a millimeter. It doesn't make sense. But there's parts where it's like, well, if I could actually move the camera a little bit, I could see where I'm supposed to go, or I could, like, see where an enemy is at, right? Like, it's not an issue for most of the game, but there are certain parts where it's like, this is stupid that I can't move the camera. And then there'll be where it's the only spots where you actually have to beat all the enemies on screen is when it flashes your character's face on the screen. And that's like, hey, you have to defeat the enemies before you could keep moving on, right? Now, when that happens, it's kind of like, well, once that's done and you defeat the enemies, an arrow might pop up pointing you which way to go. It's just a static arrow. It doesn't move with where you move. So it could just be a static 2D arrow that points straight up in the air. That doesn't really tell you where to go. You know what I mean? It's not overly complicated. It might sound like I'm making it more complicated than it needs to be. You will not get lost in the game. That's not what I'm saying. But it's just like, you'll have a static arrow pointing straight up and it disappears after a couple seconds. And you might be like, wait, where was I supposed to go? That doesn't make sense. For like 20, 30 seconds in some spots, not most spots, just a few. You might be like, where the hell was I supposed to go? Like, I'm not sure which direction, because the transitions between areas that you're supposed to go to will have like a little yellow highlight around them that is barely visible. And it would have been, beneficial to be able to shift the camera around to see that. And I said, not every area, but a few areas. So overall, I would just have to say this Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game is average. It has some issues. I mean, on the Switch anyway, it has a lot of loading. There's a lack of variety of enemies fighting the same damn thing over and over and over again. The cutscenes in the game are rather boring and long. The story just kind of strings you along. It is childish. There's not much going on. It is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The game is meant for a younger crowd, so don't hate me for saying that. But the story, there's really not a lot going on, to be honest with you. But the gameplay, there is a lot to do in the game. Like I said, it's about a 15-hour game, just doing all the story stuff, but there is a lot of little side things you can do, so keep that in mind. I would say if this is a game that still tickles it for you and you want to play it, if you have a different system other than the Switch, this is one of those. Play it on the PS5, on Xbox if it's on Xbox, on PC if you have that as an option. If you don't, then sure, get it on the Switch. But just realize those load times are really starting to get on my nerves. Holy crap, because there's just so many of them. But beside that, this game, it's not great. It's not horrible. It's not going to be a Turtles game that I believe in the future people are going to look back on fondly and just say, hey, this was a great game. It's not going to be on anybody's list in the future. Just my opinion. It's average, right in the middle. So there you go. Those are my thoughts. Thanks for watching. Bye.